the country after promising not to, saying they're going to have a paper balance in a few days, 4 years late from what they promised Nova Scotians. The craziness of tabling a budget in this House, Mr. Speaker, that had $0 for health equipment, something that made no sense to any single common sense Nova Scotian. That is the virtual reality that the NDP have created. And I'm sure that Nova Scotians are going to hear more of it in a moment, Mr. Speaker. It can only be matched by the virtual reality of the Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker, who claimed a balanced budget themselves in this House the last time they were in, but they did not count $600 million of new debt on the backs of Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party, who managing their own party, ran a deficit last year despite transferring money around between accounts in a way that no one yet understands. That's the virtual reality of both the government and
the 2 minutes. The 2 minutes is up. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, was it just me? Is there something ironic about the leader of the Conservative Party talking and nobody being able to hear him? Mr. Speaker, I'm to rise and join the debate on the address and reply to speech from the throne. First of all, I'd like to begin this afternoon by thanking His Honour Lieutenant Governor J.J. Grant for delivering the speech from the throne. I'd like to note that this was His Honour's first session in the House of Assembly. I'd also like to recognize, if I may, Mr. Speaker, and send our support to all members of the Canadian Armed Forces wherever they are serving, as well as those who are in the reserves. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I would like to acknowledge the Leader of the Official Opposition and the Leader of the Progressive Conservatives for their replies to the speech from the throne. I wanted to begin just by acknowledging the people of the riding that I represent in Cole Harbour. Mr. Speaker, I've had the privilege now for more than 15 years, in fact, into my 16th year, to represent the good people of Cole Harbour. We are a community that is rich in tradition. The Cole Harbour Heritage Farm is a refuge among suburban and city life that many families in my riding take advantage of. There is the Cole Harbour Parks and Trails Association and the enormous work that they do to ensure that there are appropriate walking trails and facilities for people, so that throughout Cole Harbour there is the opportunity for recreation. Mr. Speaker, I could go on about some of the people who come from Cole Harbour. Of course, many hockey players, many contributors to volunteer organizations, not just in Cole Harbour, but right across the province. Mr. Speaker, you would know that in addition to representing Cole Harbour, I come from Queens County. I grew up in a little town called Milton, which is outside of Liverpool. It is a picturesque part of our great province. I'm pleased to say that much of my family still lives in and around Liverpool. In fact, my sister lives right there in the town, and my brother lives in the house that I grew up in on Milton Road West. And really, that dichotomy that is represented by my experience is common to many people. We grew up in rural communities, and we now live in suburban or urban communities, and this is part of the change that has taken place in the province of Nova Scotia. But Mr. Speaker, I know you're aware of this. It may be that we are no longer in our home communities, but we have never forgotten the rural roots that we have. We go back often. We care about those rural communities. We want to ensure that they are able to not just survive, but to thrive. And we look forward to the years ahead, and may they be prosperous, not just for the city of Halifax, but for the beautiful island of Cape Breton, for the communities of southwest Nova Scotia, and of course for rural communities wherever they are in our province. Because, Mr. Speaker, this government's vision is clear. Government believes in the people of Nova Scotia. We're making decisions today that will help the province compete for new business and for good jobs. We are competing for the kinds of industry that will create new jobs. Mr. Speaker, we as a government are seeking to ensure that we are able to provide better care sooner for families from one end of the province to the other. We want to ensure that we treat our seniors with the dignity and respect that they deserve. We want to improve skills training and education. And we want to build a made in Atlantic Canada clean energy solution for future generations. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to report to the members of this House and to all Nova Scotians that our province is starting to turn a corner. The changes that this government has made are helping make life better for families in Nova Scotia today. And we are creating an environment for success into the future. Now, I want to talk just a little bit about the Better Care Sooner initiative that this government has undertaken. You know, Mr. Speaker, for generations, Nova Scotians were told that the health care crisis in our province was unfixable, that the problem had grown too big. The former governments, both Conservatives and Liberals, said the same thing, that the problem was simply too big, and that, in fact, all the provinces, no matter where they were in this great country of ours, were trying to deal with these challenges without success. The reality for Nova Scotians is that the other parties, whether they were Conservatives or Liberals, had simply given up on the public health care system. But, Mr. Speaker, our government said that the right to health care means access to care, emergency care, when and where you need it. Our government refused to accept that there was no answer. And with the help of many, Mr. Speaker, our government created the Collaborative Emergency Centre, or CECs as they have become known. Today, families get the care that they need when and where they need it. Families without a family doctor have access to same-day or next-day medical appointments. By coming together and working on a solution, Nova Scotians made this happen, Madam Speaker. Yet the leader of the official opposition continues to criticize the CECs, even though other provinces have adopted and embraced the model in their own community. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure, or Madam Speaker, I'm sure you remember that just last summer I had the opportunity to chair the Council of the Federation, and I brought all the premiers from across the country to this province, and many of them took the opportunity to learn about the innovative practices that we were putting into play in the collaborative emergency centers. And one of those premiers, the Premier of Saskatchewan, in front of the National Press Gallery, came out and said, you know, we've come here and we've looked at the collaborative emergency centers, and we're going to take this home to Saskatchewan because this is a great idea. And actually, I think what he said is that we're going to steal this and we're going to take it home to Saskatchewan. And I remember standing there at that press conference and thinking to myself, here was the Premier of Saskatchewan, a man who was coming from the province where the original principles of public Medicare were first set out, where Tommy Douglas first put in place the fundamental tenets of public health care that much of the country now sees as part of the social fabric of our nation. Here was the Premier of Saskatchewan coming to another NDP province to learn about improvement and innovation in healthcare that will propel those principles first enunciated in Saskatchewan into the 21st century. Mr. Speaker, I want you to know that we were very, very proud, and we are very, very proud of this innovative practice, this advance in Medicare. Mr. Speaker, I would just point out that just, I believe, last week or the week before last, the Liberal government of Prince Edward Island announced that it is adopting the collaborative emergency centers and also will be joining our province's 811 network. The leader of the official opposition said in his reply to this very speech that the CEC model is just another way of saying that your emergency room is closed. Mr. Speaker, the province has opened a collaborative emergency centre in the opposition leader's own constituency. And I want to point out to the leader of the opposition, I want to point out to the leader of the opposition and to the member from Kings West, if he'll let me, that not only has that stop the closures, that between September 1st and October 31st, 2012, that emergency centre was closed 60 hours. And for the same period this year, Madam Speaker, you know how many hours it was closed? How many? Zero. Zero. And I wonder if the Leader of the Opposition is suggesting that this is not an important improvement for the families and the seniors of Annapolis. Mr. Speaker, understand it. The Liberals had their chance to fix health care. And their focus, the plan that they brought forward, I'm sure the member for Clare remembers it very well. He was a part of that government. They brought forward this plan that was heavy with layoffs. Mr. Speaker, 1,000 nurses, closing 1,500 hospital beds, and pouring more public dollars into a system that was broken. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals decided that what they wanted to do was to maintain the status quo, and what they did was leave an even greater debt for our children to deal with. Nova Scotians cannot afford a return to the old way of doing things, Madam Speaker. The status quo is what got this province into the problem that we have. It is what got the province into the rut that we're in. A return to that old way will only put the province back in that same old rut. Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker, rather, this province is finally starting to turn the corner. The next few years will be critical to ensure that Nova Scotians benefit from the opportunities that are coming. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I want to speak a little bit about the Maritime Link. Maritime Link is a made in Atlantic Canada solution that will provide clean energy at the lowest and fairest price. It will bring hundreds of good jobs, and it will be an economic driver in the years to come. And yet, the Leader of the Opposition can't seem to make up his mind where he stands on this important project, or, for that matter, even what his party's energy policy should be. Mr. Speaker, in 2008, the Leader of the Opposition called on all political parties to find an Atlantic Canadian solution and to build an energy corridor right here in Nova Scotia in partnership with New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and Labrador. And up until last year, he fully supported the government's investment in the Maritime Link. Here is what he actually said in this House, Madam Speaker. I'm going to quote. He said, we can no longer look at it as solely an issue for Nova Scotians to deal with. We need to begin to engage Atlantic Canadians and Atlantic governments on the issue of energy security, and to make sure not only that our energy is secure, but that we have stable energy prices so that businesses know what the economic environment is that they are working in. He went on to say, and this is what I find particularly ironic, Madam Speaker, he went on to say, we will stand beside any premier or any party who decides to do that. Now, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, today he is turning his back on our homegrown solution to bring stable energy rates to Nova Scotians. What? Dory question period, Madam Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition and some of the members of the Liberal Party were asking about the cost of price, and I just wanted to table for your information and for the information of the Liberal caucus the editorial that appeared in the Chronicle Herald, where they talk about the price of this energy, and it says that if imports were raised to this level, 30% usage, they say the blended price of the fixed block and market energy would be 8 cents per kilowatt hour, Mr. Speaker. Imagine what an advantage this would be for Atlantic Canadians. When asked directly about the energy cost for Nova Scotians, the company in their filing pointed out that this would be less than 1% a year for the first 5 years, and then the actual price would start to decline. An enormous advantage for ratepayers, for businesses, for ordinary citizens in our province. Instead of doing what he said he would do, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition and his colleagues are busily on the phone to Hydro-Quebec, Mr. Speaker, trying to make a deal. Can you imagine? They are suggesting that it is best to rely on Hydro-Quebec, one of the largest monopolies in the world, Mr. Speaker, to supply Nova Scotia energy needs. It's hard to believe. You know, Madam Speaker, I can hear the opposition members speaking, and what they know is simply this: that they would give away the integrity of the system, the integrity of the system to another provincial government, Madam Speaker. That's what they would like to do. 10, Mr. Speaker, no, it wasn't 8%. When you voted to put the HST back on home electricity, it went up by 10%. 8% is the initial block of energy that we will receive, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, since my time as leader, there has been one area in particular that I have worked very hard to improve, and that is providing better supports for our seniors. Our party led the charge in opposition for better, more affordable care for seniors, and we continue that fight today. Today, seniors represent a generation of people who have worked their entire lives to help build our province. They turned the wheels of the economy. They put down roots here. They raised their families here. And yes, Mr. Speaker or Madam Speaker, they're the ones who paid the taxes that built the social welfare net that we have today. And yet, under previous governments, both Conservative and Liberal, seniors were forced to use their savings to pay for long-term care. This created unfair financial hardship for them and their families. Mr. Speaker, I knew that was wrong. My party knew it was wrong. And of course, Nova Scotians knew it was wrong. And that is why, in opposition, we campaigned alongside thousands of Nova Scotians from one end of the province to the other to fix this unfair situation. And today, Madam Speaker, because of the work of this government, more long-term care beds are being added, more home care services are being significantly expanded so that our seniors can live their lives with dignity. This government put nurse practitioners and paramedics in long-term care facilities so that seniors can get the care that they need without having to leave their homes. And in the last 4 years, Madam Speaker, 17,000 low-income Nova Scotians have benefited from not having to pay provincial income tax. That means an average of $450 was put back into the hands of each one of those seniors who needed it most. And all the seniors benefited because we removed the HST off of home energy. It was a simple step that made a real difference for families, even though it is one that the Leader of the Opposition calls bad public policy. Apparently, Mr. Speaker, lower energy rates is bad public policy. I am very pleased that in the upcoming budget, if the member for Yarmouth wants the floor, he'll have plenty of time. He would like, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier has the floor.
Thank you. It seems like the member for Yarmouth has lots to say when the microphone isn't on, Mr. Speaker. But you know something? In the entire time he's been here, he has never contributed a single solitary suggestion to the benefit of Western Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Not one. Not one. Has never brought forward a single project, has not brought forward a single solitary suggestion that we could act on to the benefit of Western Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to his address and reply, and perhaps he'll have something to say about that. Because today, Madam Speaker, I am trying to address a group of people in this province who the members should be respectful of, and that is the seniors of this province, the people who actually built our province. And I am very pleased, Madam Speaker, to say that in the upcoming budget, our most vulnerable seniors will again be looked after. More of the province's poorest. Madam Speaker, may I have the floor?
Order. The chatter is becoming far too loud. The Honourable Premier has the floor, and I would ask the members if they have a personal message for the Premier or another member of the Assembly, take care of it another time. Thank you. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find it disrespectful to the seniors in our province. We're trying to address an important matter, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased.
Everyone in the chamber will have an opportunity to have their chance to say what they have to say when they address, when they offer address and reply. The Honourable Premier has the floor, and I would ask you again to keep your chatter down or take it outside. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very pleased that in the upcoming budget, our most vulnerable seniors will again be looked after. More of the province's poorest seniors will be exempt from paying provincial income tax. Starting on January 1st, 2014, the number of seniors who will no longer pay provincial income tax will increase, Madam Speaker, to 25,000. Another 4,000 seniors will have a portion of their income tax returned to them. That's 29,000 seniors who will be able to make choices based on what's best for them, not out of fear of not being able to make ends meet. In addition, Madam Speaker, this year we will increase the maximum property tax rebate that is available to seniors by $200 to $800. This will help 4,000 seniors stay in their own homes and in their own communities longer. Our government and our party are proud of our support for seniors. For too long, these people have been making choices based on fear rather than on their own need. They were being forced to turn to their families to help take care of them in their retirement. It was the previous Conservative and Liberal governments who forced our seniors to undergo a humiliating assessment of their personal finances in order to pay for their own health care. Mr. Speaker, thankfully, Nova Scotia is turning the corner. Families, seniors, and young people cannot afford to return to doing the old way of doing things. Both of the opposition parties are out of ideas. Their way of doing things harmed seniors, drove young people out of the province, forced chronic ER closures in rural communities, and put the province on a path to a $1.4 billion deficit. Mr. Speaker, this week, the Minister of Finance will stand in her place and she will introduce a balanced budget. Madam Speaker, this government said that it had a plan to bring the province back to balance. The past 4 years have required sacrifice and commitment from Nova Scotians. The credit for getting back to balance belongs to those Nova Scotians. Our province is one of only 4 in Canada that will table a balanced budget this year. And we will do that while protecting, preserving, and promoting the services families and seniors depend on. This government is working hard today to ensure a better and more sustainable future for Nova Scotians. The last Liberal government was defeated on a promise to improve health care by borrowing $600 million and then claiming that the budget was balanced. The Conservative, whose leader has been trying to claim some higher ground, spent on average $277 million a year in unauthorized year-end spending. That is 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 spending that was unauthorized. It was spending that the host never had the opportunity to review. That year-end spending by the previous government added $1 billion to the debt of this province. I always say, Madam Speaker, that if you want to get out of a hole, you have to stop digging. And that is exactly what our government did. In 2009, Nova Scotians elected an NDP government because the status quo wasn't working. They wanted change. They wanted something better for the province. Mr. Speaker, the NDP is delivering that change, and we are working towards preparing for the opportunities that are spread out ahead of us. Nova Scotians want to continue moving our province forward to a better future for them and for their families. But if it were up to the members opposite, that progress would grind to a halt.
Bring the shovels back.
Madam Speaker, Nova Scotians have a choice of the NDP and of the old parties and the old ways. Nova Scotians could choose New Democrats who will seize every realistic opportunity because we seize those opportunities for a simple reason, because jobs means food on the table. It means that a worker is taking home a paycheck to support his family. It means that loved ones can come home from Alberta. It means a better chance for kids and grandkids to grow up here in Nova Scotia. Or Nova Scotians could turn back to a party that would simply ignore when opportunity comes knocking. They could choose New Democrats who would enable them to control their own destiny, building community-based industries while leading Canada and the world in creating a green economy. Or Nova Scotians could turn back to a party that would allow control of our environment to go to the highest bidder, ignoring the global challenge of climate change. They could choose New Democrats who believe in local food, local energy, and made-in-Canada solutions, who believe that those are a stronger way to build our province and a stronger way to build our country. Or Nova Scotians could turn back to a party who would give control of Nova Scotia's energy to Hydro-Quebec, one of the biggest monopolies in the world. They could choose New Democrats who are ready to invest in affordable housing, a healthy start in life for every child, and a little more dignity for the seniors who worked hard their whole life to build this province. Or Nova Scotians could turn back to a party that pays lip service to poverty reduction and a better life. Or, Madam Speaker, they can continue to support New Democrats who know that the real enemies are poverty and joblessness and despair, who know that we must work with business and labor and everyone else who's ready to move Nova Scotia forward so that there is a better future right here. Or, Mr. Speaker, they could turn back to a party who sees working people and labor unions as public enemy number one. Mr. Speaker, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Nova Scotia is starting to turn the corner. There is renewed hope and optimism in communities right across the province. And, Madam Speaker, it's thanks to the NDP. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move adjournment.
Government House Leader. Is he? The question is for adjournment of address reply. Is it agree? Sorry, all in favor say aye. Those opposed nay. The motion is carried. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, could you please call government bills for second reading?
Now call government bills for second reading.
Madam Speaker, could you please call Bill number 3, Support for Parents of Critically Ill or Abducted Children's Act?
I now call Bill number 3, Support for Parents of Critically Ill or Abducted Children's Act. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to move second reading of Bill 3, Support for Parents of Critically Ill or Abducted Children Act. Speaker, this legislation will let families focus on what is important during these difficult times. Their children and family, not whether they're going to keep or lose their job. No family should have to worry about what they're going to do or how they pay their bills or whether their job is secure. And when they're ready to return to work, they'll return to work, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I speak as a father and as a grandfather. I can only imagine the heartache facing families who need to take time off work because their child is critically ill or is the victim of a serious crime. It is a terrible situation, Speaker, I wish no family had to experience, but unfortunately, it happens, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotians who need time away from work because their child is critically ill or a victim of a serious crime will no longer have to worry about losing their job. This legislation provides protection for families that I hope they will never need, but protection that will mean the world to them if indeed the crisis strikes. Mr. Speaker, without such a change, there is no guarantee that the worker would have a job to return to at the end of such leave. Madam Speaker, I am proud to say that this leave was championed by a brave, determined New Waterford woman, Valerie Lovies, who had the unfortunate situation of living this very experience. Her daughter, Stephanie, died of cancer in 2008. Speaker, Ms. Lovies has been fighting for this change ever since, so that parents could be with their children and not have to work at such a critical time in their lives. Madam Speaker, my heart and indeed my respect go out to Ms. Lovies for the ordeal she went through. My congratulations for ensuring that Canadian parents and families have this time they need to help for their children when they grieve, Madam Speaker. In 2004, the provincial government introduced a compassionate care leave of 8 weeks for family members who take time away from work to look after their loved ones, often in the last weeks of their lives. That leave be too short when a patient or a guardian has to cope with a child's longer-term serious illness or injury. This June, the federal employment insurance program is being changed to allow parents and guardians to receive up to 35 weeks of EI benefits if they need to take time off to provide care for a child or critical illness or injury. Madam Speaker, this legislation, which falls under the Labour Standards Code, will ensure that parents are allowed 37 weeks off time worked with protection to return to their jobs at the end of such leave. The 37 weeks includes new 35 weeks of EI coverage plus the standard 2-week waiting period. It will also allow a parent or guardian to have a longer leave if the child dies or disappears due to a criminal act. Although these cases are rare in Nova Scotia, parents have already had to deal with very painful situations involving the loss of a child. Under the proposed legislation, Madam Speaker, under the proposed amendments, parents and guardians will be allowed the following: up to 37 weeks off of work to care for a critically ill child, up to 104 weeks of work if a child has died as a result of a crime, and up to 52 weeks of work if a child has disappeared as a result of a crime. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotia is the first province in Atlantic Canada to extend this protection for families. Again, this legislation provides protection I hope that no family ever has to use. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognize the honourable member for Yarmouth.
Madam Chair, I want to thank the Deputy Premier for providing our caucus office with information on this bill before presenting it and providing us with a briefing. And I want to thank him for his touching comments. This legislation is in line with federal changes to the Labour Code, and I know that there are 3 other provinces, at least Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec, I believe, that have similar legislation. Based on federal data that's prorated for Nova Scotia, this could potentially affect approximately 150 Nova Scotian families. I want to also extend thanks and appreciation to Valerie Lovies for her hard work and her success in achieving this piece of legislation here. I know that Ms. Lovies' journey hasn't been always an easy one, and that based on personal experiences she had in her own life and grievances, that this has helped us lead to this moment today. The Liberal caucus will be supporting this piece of legislation, and we look forward to discussing it further at future readings.
Now recognize the honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise in my place this afternoon to speak in support of this bill as well. First of all, Madam Speaker, I think it's important that we recognize the efforts of Valerie Lovies in bringing this bill forward. We can only imagine the turmoil and a crisis like this will create in anyone's life, and she is certainly to be commended. As the previous speakers have mentioned, Madam Speaker, what this bill does is bring the Labour Code in line with the federal changes that were recently introduced. And it's good to see that Nova Scotia is the 3rd province to join along with the other 2 provinces. Again, when you look at the circumstances, we hope that this is something that doesn't have to be used at any point. But reality says it will happen. And it's important that a bill like this is there in place to look after those. So the PC caucus will be supporting this bill as we move forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise on Bill number 3 to support for parents of critically ill or abducted children Act. I listened to the comments made by the Minister of Labour, the Government House Leader and Deputy Premier, and it brought to mind an issue as well that I think it would be useful to remind the government of. And when the Minister spoke about any families having to face a tragedy involving a child, the result of a criminal act, I think it's important that we remind the government as well that's important that the Minister of Justice and Attorney General ensure that victim services are there to provide the necessary support to these families. In the past, my colleague from Halifax Clayton Park, and I believe my colleague from Bedford Birch Cove, have risen concerns regarding families who had reached the maximum available to them under victim services and had difficulties in accessing additional funding for counseling and other supports. We know of families that have been impacted by this, and so one would certainly hope that the Minister of Labour will have the opportunity to have a discussion with the Minister of Justice that if we're going to see Bill 3 go through this House, that there as well be a recognition that there is an important role not only to ensure that people have employment opportunities still available to them, that they do not lose their employment, but at the same time that the families receive all the possible support made available to them in victim services. Madam Speaker, for those who are wondering what is victim services, it is a service provided by the Department of Justice. Pretty much any time you appear in court, whether it be for a speeding ticket or any other type of offense, for the most part, the judge will order, if found guilty, what's called a victim impact surcharge. The fee from that goes into victim services, which is meant to assist victims of crime and families of victims of crime access counseling and other related services that might be necessary. But again, unfortunately, in so many cases, governments have had to place limits on that, which has caused some issues for families, especially those of violent crime. And those are issues that have been brought to our attention, which, as I mentioned before, my colleagues have worked very hard to keep that on the government's radar and to ensure that those voices are being heard here in the legislature. One of the other issues that I wanted to raise, and maybe the government House Leader can advise us, is I do remember a few years ago, prior to the last election, where the now Premier, who, when he was Leader of Official Opposition, introduced a bill regarding Army reservists. And it was a similar legislation that said that if any reservists went into actual theater of combat, I think is how it's referred, that when they returned, their jobs would be protected. I remember not long ago, the issue was raised that that was never proclaimed. So maybe the Minister of Labour, Deputy Premier, can look into that to see what the status of that legislation is, because that received all-party support. But I remember not very long ago when someone raised the question of where it was at, it had not been proclaimed. So hopefully that's changed from the last time that was raised, but maybe the government House Leader will be able to check into that to see what the status of that legislation is, because I do know it was years after its passage and it hadn't been proclaimed yet. So I'm certainly hopeful that Bill number 3 is not going to take that long to implement, especially under a majority government which is bringing it forward. But with that, those are the comments that I wish to make, and certainly we will be supportive of Bill 3 moving forward. Merci.
If I'm to recognize the Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education, it will be to close debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I will endeavour to get the answer to the question in debate that was put as quickly as I can, and hopefully before business ends today. So now, Madam Speaker, I want to thank all parties for their intervention on this bill. I look for speedy passage. Now I move debate on Bill 3, and now it be read for a second time.
The question is for second reading of Bill number 3, Support for Parents of Critically Ill and Abducted Children's Act. Is the House ready for the question? All in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 3, an act to amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code to support parents of critically ill or abducted children.
Ordered that Bill number 3 be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, excuse me. Could you please call address and reply to the speech from the throne?
Now call address and reply. Recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax, Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it's my pleasure to rise on the speech from the throne, and I don't think I need too many notes prepared for this, because there are a number of themes that run consistently through this legislature, and I think that when we sat through the almost hour of the speech from the throne, we got to hear the government's favorite themes. We got to hear their buzzwords and their slogans and their basically their jingles that have been running this government for the last 4 years. And Nova Scotians are familiar with them because of the expensive advertising that's run on a regular basis, better care sooner and so on and so on. There's a slogan for education and health and finance and you name it. And there's, some good things happen in this province, and they don't always have a jingle. But those jingles and slogans, I don't believe, Madam Speaker, have very much substance to them. And that is really why I was anxious to rise today and speak to the throne speech that we heard the other day, because it repeatedly spoke of everything being a first. It was the first for this and the first for that, and the first time we ever had a legislature practically, the first time that sensible people ever got together here and discussed anything. You'd think that they'd invented the legislature, really. It was beyond reason. One of the things it said was they've got the first immigration strategy ever. Well, Madam Speaker, maybe they're calling it a strategy, but I was here when we had the first Minister of Immigration ever, when we had our first nominee agreement signed with the federal government and created an Office of Immigration. And there was definitely consultation done. And I'm not talking about Liberal consultation here. We were not in government. We had a Conservative government at the time that did come out with a paper on immigration, that did set targets for immigration, that did consult with immigrants and with universities and with people that could support immigrants. So it's a little bit galling to think that suddenly this government, the one across the way here, says they're the first ever to do a strategy on immigration. I mean, really, there's a lot of stretching of the truth throughout this entire throne speech. As I say, I didn't sit down to count how many times it was said, but I'm sure there were at least a dozen times that the government boasted that they were the first to do this and the first to do that. And really, it starts to almost take away from any of the accomplishments the government has had when there's so much embellishment, so much boastfulness. To begin with, Madam Speaker, that throne speech, I believe, was, somebody said, is it the fourth or the fifth? Fifth. The fifth that we've had, even though the government's been in less than, not quite 4 years. We've had 5 throne speeches. That's every time the House sits, we get another throne speech. And the government, it's as if the government, if they don't hear all of these accolades and all these boasts, they can't carry on with business. That they're very insecure, Madam Speaker, about where they're going. They need to write the script and have the Lieutenant Governor come in here with some fanfare and bring in some illustrious guests to join us, and then, go on in a fantasy about how wonderfully they're doing in government. Madam Speaker, I know there are other members that are anxious as well on this side of the House to add a little bit of reality to that narrative. I mean, to begin with the narrative that we're going to hear on Thursday with the balanced budget fiction that we're waiting to see. Madam Speaker, I've expressed my skepticism that that's going to be done in a straightforward manner. The Minister of Finance said, and it was quite amazing, she said to the business crowd at the Chamber of Commerce that not only would she have a balanced budget, which means reversing the $277 million deficit that the government is carrying right now in this year, not only would she reverse it, but she'd do it without harming any of the important services that we value so highly. Madam Speaker, that was just, nobody saw that as being a realistic proposition. How are you going to turn around $277 million that we need to find somewhere in the budgets of the departments of the government and not cause any harm? We know what $65 million coming out of the Education Department has done in 3 years. We know that there's been a lot of harm, a lot of unhappy parents, a lot of programs that have been cut, changes in the way we deliver education that has not been beneficial to the families and the children in this province. We know that there's been money cut, I think 10 million out of the university budgets at a time when, again, they need to keep current, they need to be able to invest in students. That's the only way we're going to compete in the future, is if we have good institutions and we can attract students from other provinces as well, because we don't have the population base, Madam Speaker, to be able to manage that. And so, in the face of those cuts, which don't sound dramatic in and of themselves, 10 million particularly may not sound like that much. but it's had a real effect on universities. They are hurting, and they're having a difficult time in offering the level of education that they are accustomed to doing so. And we have a very fine reputation, and that's something that we should value and that we should be doing more to enhance. Because, as I said before, bringing in students from other countries and from across Canada has been very, very beneficial to this province. Madam Speaker, overall, the speech, as I said earlier, was very long and very boastful. I wanted to actually get my copy of the speech, if I could, Madam Speaker. I wasn't certain that we were reverting to this today. Do you have a copy of it? Thank you very much. I had my notes out earlier in order to speak a little bit to it, but I did want to follow through and have some points in particular as we go through. First of all, as I said, it seems really unnecessary to have to recalibrate the government really almost every time we come to sit here. It's more than once a year that we've been doing that with a new speech from the throne. And I think other governments in the past have read one and set the course for their term in office. And you know, it's even funnier to see a speech from the throne here today, Madam Speaker, right before an election will be called sometime soon. We know it's coming. It's obviously the government taking that opportunity to kind of wrap up what they see as their accomplishments. And you know, as I say, the substance for doing so is very thin. And I know as others, I'm sure, felt the same way. We heard the same phrases again and again as we went through there. Boastful and really pretty empty phrases about turning a corner. And I understand government wants to instill hope and optimism. That, you know, that's obviously something that we'd love to attain. But, you know, just this week, in fact, I think it was yesterday, the Globe and Mail had an article about the coming budget and talking about where we were at, and they're very skeptical as well in looking at it. I'm going to read a quote from you just in the beginning of this, and then I'll table it, because I know if I read from it, Madam Speaker, I should table it. But this is from the Globe and Mail, and it's written by Jane Tabor, who's their correspondent here in Atlantic Canada. It begins with one of the weakest performing economies in the country and little in the way of natural resources, Nova Scotia's NDP government is promising a balanced budget, succeeding where other provinces and federal governments have failed. And then it goes on to say that basically it said the critics are curious about how this will be achieved when the budget comes down on Thursday, and goes on from there. And there's a lot of people that she interviews which are curious. $277 million in this year's deficit, and remember, it's grown by $66 million, so the government loves always to say how well managed they are from year to year, but this year the revenues have not been there, and we heard that at the quarterly updates. And I know, Madam Speaker, not many people turn their attention to the financial quarterly updates. That sounds pretty dry. But it's very important to the people of Nova Scotia to know, as the year is progressing, how well they are doing. How well is the government managing to their budget? How realistic was the budget to begin with? And what we've seen this year, and we learned more recently from the Auditor General, the budget was understated on the revenue side by $27 million. So there was a mistake there that created, really, it should have been $27 million larger in the deficit right at the outset. But in the meantime, even with that in it, there's been a total amount of $66 million that has changed to the negative for this province. And we're now at $277 million in deficit. And we don't know where the year is going to end up yet, so it could be worse than that. So that is a huge amount of money in our budget. You know, I noticed that the former finance minister also made light of the $27 million, saying it wasn't very material. The budget's $9 billion, and this is $27 million. But I think what's more important, Madam Speaker, is to take that $27 million and measure it against the deficit that was reported. That deficit should have been $27 million more, and that's over 10% of what was reported. 10% is very material. So when you understate your deficit by 10% or more, that's quite a lot. That's a big mistake. It is a big boo-boo. It's not just a little thing that you slough off. And so I think it was disingenuous to compare that $27 million to the total budget, because that wasn't the material amount that really mattered. And so it's the sort of thing we're seeing a lot from the government. And another perfect example is the speech, again, if I could go back to the Minister of Finance speech to the Chamber of Commerce. Probably the biggest thing that she could say that might have pleased that audience was that she was going to continue reducing the small business tax. And we have been on a path of a half-point reduction, 0.5% every year for the last few years. It was actually a commitment, I believe, that was made before the NDP came to power, but at the same time, it's a good one. We had high tax on the small business side. So I'm glad that they've done that. However, what the minister failed to tell the business crowd this year was that while she continued to reduce the small business tax by another 0.5%, she was changing the threshold at which you would move from small business tax into corporation tax. And corporation tax is not 3% like the current or the incoming small business tax. It was 3.5%. It's not 3.5% or 3%, it's 16%. So at a lower income level, those little companies will now have their higher dollar income fall into the corporation tax. And that's great because it bailed out the government. It allows them to lower a tax and still take in just as much money. But again, it's disingenuous. It's really not telling the whole story to go to the business crowd at the Chamber of Commerce and tell half the tale. That's what I find is happening again and again. And this is a small tax, not in an annual way, not a lot of money that we're talking about, but it matters to the business community. And I don't think they appreciate the fact that the threshold was changed without any knowledge about being told. Now, we're told a lot of the small businesses will fit in, will fall under that threshold. They'll remain in the small business category, and that's good. They will get the full benefit of the lower tax. But it's the trouble with this is it undermines people's confidence in government. It undermines our ability to believe what we're hearing from government. And then, as I said, Madam Speaker, couple that with the endless advertising that this government is doing. And I know that, we're going to do that. Just a few more minutes. Madam Speaker, you know, the advertising has been very constant. Anybody who watches the news at night or is watching in prime time will find that there's an endless amount of ads. You know, some of them are negative ads as well, which again takes me back to why I'm pretty sure the government's at least trying to assess whether this is a good time to have an election, because they're spending an inordinate amount of money on advertising as well that's negative towards the Liberal Party and to the Leader of the Opposition. And really, they've chosen an area where their record is very, very poor. And tonight, Madam Speaker, as you know, we'll be talking about the Maritime Link and the current review by the Utility and Review Board that's going on to look into whether or not that link whether the costs that are being presented and whether the information that is being presented is accurate and whether it's a good deal for Nova Scotia. What's missing in the whole discussion, well, two things. One will be the timing. The URB is not being given adequate time to assess it, which we're going to hear more about tonight. And that's a very important point. Because if you're talking about a 35-year arrangement, which is going to lock our province into this deal, when you're talking about $1.5 billion, which is the estimated cost today by Emera, again, you're asking us to trust that what Emera says is exactly accurate. You're asking us to wonder whether or not they've added escalators or inflation or interest charges in that. Because we've heard as high as $4 billion is the actual cost. So 3 times what's being reported at the URB. And again, you're asking Nova Scotians to think it's a good deal to front all that cost, see $1 billion go into Emera in profits over that time, and then at the end of it all, for $1, give back the Maritime Link to Newfoundland. Just give it back. How is that a good deal? You know, once we've paid it off, we won't have any asset in the future, and no special arrangement, no protected prices. Madam Speaker, all of those facts belie what we see here in this speech from the throne, which I felt was insipid and boastful, and it was really, you know, frankly, frankly, very, very thin on any real details and just making up things, I believe, as they went along. And I know there is no fact checker on a speech from the throne, so I guess our opportunity to get up and speak to the speech becomes a little bit of a fact checker job. Of course, we don't have the legion of communications people that work for the government. They helped write this document. They probably would be good at vetting it if we actually asked them to. But of course, they don't report to us and they don't do our bidding. They write the story that the government wants written. And again, we've said the budget is going to be a fiction. And we think that there's an awful lot of fiction in this as well. The government certainly has referred to their power rates. To actually say that they're saying Nova Scotia's plan means the lowest, fairest power rates, ending the era of double-digit increases. We're guaranteeing double-digit increases. We've done it over the 30% increases just since 2010. In fact, Madam Speaker, I think that the chart has been submitted a number of times, but I have a bar chart that shows how much power has increased between 2010 and 2013. And by far, the highest increases in the country have been here in Nova Scotia. Ours are up over 30% in that time, and the Canadian average is 21%. Double digit across the board, but ours is the highest by 50%. And I think that's a shame. It can't be explained the way the government does, that they've chosen one project to back, that this one project is suddenly going to be the fairest. How can you use words like fairest and cheapest when you haven't compared it to anything else? If you haven't done any comparison, then you've just picked one out of the air and said all by itself, independently. Again, Madam Speaker, the fear I have is that documents like this speech from the throne really make a mockery out of real policy, about true debate, about being honest and direct with the people of Nova Scotia. And people expected more of the NDP. I said that when they were first elected. There were high expectations. People thought there might be a greater level of accountability and openness and fairness, but that has not materialized. We have a more conservative government than the previous government, fiscally and in other ways. We have an abandonment of the social agenda that previously defined the NDP. And Madam Speaker...
Well, just listen to her.
Yeah.
Listen to her.
Madam Speaker...
You might learn a few things.
Madam Speaker, the principles that so many of the members across the way espoused and talked about and showed great concern for absolutely evaporated in the last
Just order.
4 years.
Just order. Thank you. Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Madam Speaker, my time has elapsed for the moment. I know that you would like to have an adjournment today.
Yes.
So I would call that we adjourn our debate. Thank you.
It's been a motion to adjourn, address and reply. Is all in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, that concludes the government's business for today. We ask the House to now rise, meet in the hours of 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. And now I hand it over to the official opposition House Leader to give us business for Opposition Day.
Recognize the House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Following question period tomorrow, the official opposition business will be debate on Bill number 17, an act to review the public school programs in Nova Scotia, and resolution number 42, which reads, therefore be it resolved that the NDP's track record of university prepayments, consistent technique of making spending projections and employee estimates higher than actuals, and failure to disclose a $27 million revenue overstatement highlights their inability to manage the finances of the province and brings into question the veracity of their budgetary reporting. And with that, Madam Speaker, I would move that our business for today adjourn and we move into the next phase.
The motion is that we do now rise to meet again tomorrow, Wednesday, April the 3rd, between the hours of 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. All in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. We've reached the moment of interruption, and by leave being given earlier today to proceed with emergency debate, we'll now proceed under Rule 43, and that resolution reads, Therefore, be it resolved that the business of the House be set aside for the purpose of discussing a matter of urgent public importance. The timeline for the review of the maritime link by the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, the board, which was set in regulation by the NDP government, does not allow for enough time for proper and reasoned examination of the proposed project, and the regulations should be amended to allow the board, whatever time it deems appropriate, to make a final decision in the best interest of Nova Scotians. I now recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it gives me great pleasure to rise today and have the leave of the House to discuss what I think is an extremely important matter and a pressing matter that has been raised repeatedly recently in recent weeks by independent people outside of this legislature who are calling on the government to amend the regulations around the Maritime Link Act to allow the Utility and Review Board additional time to review the volume of information that has come before it. Now, the other day, let's review why we're at the point we are. A number of weeks ago, some of the interveners wrote the Utility and Review Board and requested that the board extend the timeline for that process. On March 15th, 2013, the board wrote a letter back and talked about a number of the issues that they had raised, but on one of them pointed out the regulations under the Maritime Link Act impose a strict timeline for review and decision on this matter, and accordingly the board is not in a position to give any substantial extensions to the filing. And I'll table that letter. As a follow-up to that, the Utility and Review Board's Executive Director, Mr. Paul Allen, again noted that the timeline is governed by legislation and said, quote, "The board can't go outside the regulations," said Allen, noting the only way this process will go on longer than 180 days is via an order in council, and I'll table that. Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker, these requests have come from the Consumer Advocate, the Small Business Advocate, the Canadian Wind Association, the Sierra Club, the Grand River Keepers of Labrador, both the third party and the official opposition. You know, all signing on as interveners of this and stating that, listen, there's a lot of information that's there that should be. Madam Speaker, I have a number of documents I'm trying to table here, but thank you. You know, for example, let me read a section from the letter of the Consumer Advocate. The Consumer Advocate, who's a nonpartisan representative of consumer ratepayers in this province, in his letter to the Premier. You know, he says, "How the board deals with this application is a matter of importance to not only Nova Scotia ratepayers, but to the province as a whole. The decision of the board will affect the supply and cost of electricity for Nova Scotia for years to come. All Nova Scotians are entitled to be assured the board has adequate time to access and consider all relevant evidence and determine what is the lowest cost long-term advantage. We support any request that would provide the board with further time to carry out its analysis and arrive at a decision which will be the benefit of the province." You know, so Madam Speaker, this isn't about, you know, this isn't about politics trying to delay a process. This is about the interveners that the minister himself said that he consulted with, saying, you know what? There's far more documentation and information in this process than anybody believed would happen. And it is only fair to Nova Scotians that all of that is able to go through. You know, a couple of weeks ago was the first deadline for interveners, or for the responses to interveners. And as late as yesterday, Nova Scotia Power, or Nova Scotia Maritime Link Incorporated, which is the proponent, were filing corrections to that information. That's almost a month later, they're filing corrections to that initial data. And of course, we're pleased they're filing the corrections. I mean, that's very good, but it means that the interveners reviewing that information have lost almost a month in the process just from that very fact. You know, Madam Speaker, the other day when I asked the minister if he would just simply consider changing the order in council, which is a very simple process, to say, you know what, we're going to let the board decide. the board is this minister stands up repeatedly in this House and tells us how the board will make the best decision. Well, the board is telling us they would like to make that, they would be willing to make that best decision on how long is necessary, but he won't let them. And he needs to answer to Nova Scotians why he won't give them that power. So he stood the other day and said, well, you know, the official opposition supported the Maritime Link Act, which would allow the review. Well, Madam Speaker, let me read from Hansard at that time, because he's absolutely right that we supported the act. But let me read exactly what I said. I think we'll certainly support the bill, as imperfect as it is. And when I say imperfect, the one thing that I think is missing in this is the fact we are left with a hastily crafted bill that designs everything in regulation and says, well, basically it's a bill that says Cabinet will create the regulations. I think it would have been better for the public at this stage in the game to have seen in the legislation a complete list of issues that the board would cover. There are many issues, and we have to leave it to our belief that Cabinet will ensure that those regulations are appropriate and ensure an appropriate review. And I have mixed feelings on that. So we're going to have to wait and see how those regulations come out. You know, I'll table that. Madam Speaker, so yes, we voted for it because we believed the minister when he said, and when the Premier said, that they would allow the board to conduct a full and complete analysis of this, and in fact they have not. I pointed out the fact that one of the risks in that legislation was what this government would do with regulations, but because it was in the dying days of a session, there was no real other option, because we were either going to have no review at all, or we were going to have a review that is crafted by the regulation. A review that for weeks the Premier and the Energy Minister had insisted didn't need legislation to happen, but which we raised and said, no, you do. So, you know, Madam Speaker, there is no way that anybody in this province can know whether this is the best alternative for Nova Scotians, whether the deal structured makes sense without having a complete analysis of the information. The experts in the field, the experts who do this for all the way through, have said with near unanimity that there is not enough time to review the information. So it makes no sense. You know, the only reason that you would continue with this time frame is if you felt that there was something that was going to make you look bad come out. And so the question is, does the government feel that giving more time will mean that the consumer advocate and the small business advocate and the utility and review board will in fact find out things that the government is hoping get missed? You know, we've all heard the civil lawsuits where the defendant in the lawsuit will bury the plaintiff in paper, you know, so that they hope that in the disclosure, and that's exactly what's happening before the board now. You know, I'm even willing to give the minister the credit to say that he may very well have felt, with the best advice, that 6 months would be long enough when he passed those regulations. He very well could have. But he has to be strong enough, and he has to defend Nova Scotians in his position to understand that the people we rely on to ensure that this is being treated fairly, the small business advocate, the consumer advocate, are saying, you know what, we have now seen how much information there is going to be in this hearing, and there is not enough time. The minister is the only person in this province who has the ability to change that. And if he doesn't change it, there is no reason for a single Nova Scotian to believe that this is, in fact, the best choice for Nova Scotia. The fact is that there is an issue with being at the end of the energy line. The minister's right about that. In fact, this caucus was talking about that before he was. The concerns we've raised are about the deal. They are concerns that are no different than members who are before the board, such as the Canadian Wind Association, natural gas producers, and again, the small business advocate and consumer advocate are raising. In fact, the board and the board's own counsel have raised some of those questions. You know, this is a deal where we are being asked to pay 100% of the cost of a piece of infrastructure that we will not own at the end of the day. This is a deal where in Newfoundland they're talking about the fact that they're thrilled to finally not be tied to Hydro-Quebec, and in fact now they are getting the best end of the deal. Well, you know what? That's great for Newfoundland, but that doesn't mean that it's automatically the best deal for Nova Scotia. And if this minister believes that this deal truly is the best for Nova Scotians, that the way it's structured is absolutely the best, he should have no fear about saying to the board, have the time you need. I know that when you review this information, Nova Scotians will find out that this is the best deal, that this is the lowest cost alternative, that this is the most secure supply. But at the way that this is currently structured, it is almost a guarantee that some of the issues before the board will simply not be covered. They have recently, just last week, the board had to move the hearing to St. Mary's. And they had to move the hearing to St. Mary's because board offices won't have enough room for all the interveners. Well, that's great. But normally what will happen is, in some of the general rate hearings, is if we get to the end of the 4 or 5 days that are scheduled and all the questions haven't been asked, they go, okay, well, we'll look at our calendar and we'll schedule another 4 or 5 days next month to continue this. This timetable does not even give the board that option. What that means, I don't know whether the minister thinks that the board should go into 24-hour sessions if that happens, like we've seen in the legislature in some years, or whether he just thinks they should say, well, I guess those matters aren't going to be discussed. The board already expanded the issues list when they started this and said by 2 or 3 items, they're going to look into the water rights management issue to some extent. They're going to look into the issue of, you know, what about this security of supply issue? What happens if Nova Scotia is faced with a brownout because the line goes down in northwestern Newfoundland, where Manitoba Hydro has said that's possible and an outage could last 30 to 90 days, or 30 to 60 days, extended periods. They're going to look into that, which makes sense. But the minister, when they added those, did not extend the timeline. The board does not have the time to go out and hire independent consultants. So instead, they're going to rely on consultants that were hired by the proponents of this project, the proponents being the Premier, the Minister, and Emira. Well, they don't have the ability to go out because they don't have the time, because even the consumer advocate, again, same problem. They can't go out and hire a consultant to completely review this information. Why? Because any consultant they would choose to hire simply doesn't have the time to go through all the information. You know, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, time and time again in this House, this minister and the Premier have stood and said that they rely on the Utility and Review Board. They've stood and they've said that they rely on the small business advocate and on the consumer advocate to make decisions and to help make decisions that are in the best interests of Nova Scotians. I wonder why it is that the minister thinks that now that those people are coming to him and coming to the Premier and saying, we need more time, that he's now saying no and throwing them under the bus. Why is he doing that? He needs to stand in this House and explain why. Because last week he said, well, we consulted with the consumer advocate and we consulted with the board and they thought 6 months would be enough. And I believe him. I'm sure they said that at the time. But he also knows that since then, and I just tabled the letter, they have written and said, you know what? Turns out it's not enough time. There is no way for us to get through that information. You know, the Small Business Advocate has submitted a similar letter to the Premier. The Canadian Wind Association has submitted another letter, and I've tabled another letter signed by most of the other interveners in the hearing. You know, Madam Speaker, the reality is there is nothing wrong and nothing at risk by giving more time to ensure that the right decision is made for Nova Scotians. And you know what? Maybe, just maybe, the minister will be right. And they'll say, and if more time was given, they'll go, you know what, this is the best option. But most Nova Scotians don't know, and increasingly more Nova Scotians are falling into that column of, you know, I'm not sure that this is the best deal because I don't feel good about it. I don't feel good that the government isn't willing to be open and transparent about this. I don't trust the government because it feels like they're hiding something by sticking to this 180 days. You know, the fact is, on March 19th, the minister said if they feel need additional time for interveners to review the material, that will be their decision. but he knew that it wasn't their decision. You know, the fact was that they don't have that ability, but that's what he said to the media in that article. He said that the board could make that decision to do it, but he knows it's only cabinet. So, Madam Speaker, I call on the minister to stand up and say he will give them more time to prove that this is the best, in the best interest of Nova Scotia, that this is the right way to go. And if he doesn't do that, tell us what he's hiding. Thank you.
Now recognize the Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and certainly welcome this opportunity to talk about energy issues. It's always exciting to have the opportunity to talk about my portfolio and about the importance of energy rates to Nova Scotians. And certainly the Maritime Link is an important part of our energy plan here for this province, and as we work towards the lowest fares rates for Nova Scotians. And certainly as I traveled the province over the last number of weeks on our energy tour with the Honourable Member from Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville, we had the opportunity to engage with a large number of Nova Scotians, and over they said it's great that you're, first of all, coming to our communities and talking about the issues, and secondly, you know, we welcome that opportunity to learn more about the Maritime Link. So certainly there's been some questions been raised here this afternoon and in previous question periods, and certainly directly from Nova Scotians, I heard that there's a lot of interest in the importance of the Maritime Link. And but I know one of the questions that's been asked, Madam Speaker, is that's on Nova Scotian minds. Certainly, whether the Liberal caucus is supportive of the Maritime Link as government is, and I've been trying to figure it out. Some days they're supportive of it, and some days they're not, and it's a little bit of a flip-flop, I guess, to try to figure out exactly are they supportive or are they not. It's hard to know whether, you know, what their mind is thinking on any particular day. And in fact, I want to mention that the leader of the opposition, I know a few years back, he flew to Newfoundland to lobby for the Lower Churchill for the Maritime Link, and so I had the opportunity to go online, Madam Speaker, and look at and Google, the Lower Churchill and the Liberal Party and see what come up. And there were a number of interesting things there that did come up. And again, is the party in favor of the project? Are they supportive of the project or not? So here's one thing that I found. It said that Lower Churchill is crucial to Nova Scotia's energy future. Okay, well, that seems supportive on that particular day. I think it was February the 14th of 2012, the leader of the Liberal Party had said that. But on another day, he had this to say. He said that the Lower Churchill is a bad deal for Nova Scotians. So it's just the opposite on that particular day, and that was back on July the 31st of 2012. So just again, it's hard to figure out which one they're supporting. Then on August the 13th of 2010, the Liberal leader said that, well, as leader of the opposition, I support the energy minister's position on the Lower Churchill. So again, it's sort of wishy-washy. One day they're supporting it, one day they're not. So I'll file that or table that, Madam Speaker, and it's just very difficult to figure out what is the Liberal Party position on the Maritime Link and the Lower Churchill, but that's the evidence right there. But maybe the member opposite that spoke before me can tell us, whether he supports a made in Atlantic Canada solution to our energy problems, or whether they're going to continue to support Hydro-Quebec. I've heard a lot about their energy plan that supports Hydro-Quebec from that province, and I know there's been direct contact between the Liberal Party and Hydro-Quebec, and so I don't know what their energy plan is, but I'll leave it for the public to decide whether they're more supportive of an Atlantic Canadian project or of a Hydro-Quebec project. We've heard loud and clear from Nova Scotians that they want change and that the status quo is no longer acceptable. And for far too long, we've relied in this province on coal, on dirty, imported, polluting coal. And we believe that it's time to get away from the past and to take some action, to have a plan of action for this province. And really the inaction that occurred over a number of years under previous administrations has to end. And I know that Nova Scotians have a lot of questions, certainly about the Maritime Link project is part of our energy plan in this province. And we think it's one of the most ambitious projects that's ever been undertaken here in Atlantic Canada, and really has the potential to change our energy future for generations to come. You know, the Maritime Link is going to create thousands of good jobs for Nova Scotians and Maritimers and Atlantic Canadians. We've already had expert testimony, witness from John Dalton of Power Advisory, Inc., that it is the best value for ratepayers. He's an energy expert that his reputation relies on his professional opinion, and he appears before public utilities around Eastern North America, and he has to defend what he comes up with. And in his opinion, this project with the Maritime Link is the lowest cost option for Nova Scotians. It's more than $400 million cheaper than the Hydro-Quebec option, and it's actually about $1.5 billion cheaper than relying on natural gas and wind. And in addition, of course, the Nova Scotians will not only get the lowest cost option because of his evidence, but the federal government is on side with this project as well, and they've come up with a federal loan guarantee that will save Nova Scotians more than $100 million. So there's many good positives about the Maritime Link, including you know, greenhouse gas emission targets that will be met, and in addition, it will put us in an energy loop that will allow us to use energy from other jurisdictions, whether it's New Brunswick or Quebec or New England, but it'll allow us to bring in energy at market rates that will allow us truly to compete on the continental scale. I mentioned our energy tour. I had the pleasure of visiting a number of communities from Bridgewater and Antigonish and Sydney and Pictou area, Port Hawkesbury, as well as my ministerial assistant hosted a number of sessions in Yarmouth and Amherst and Guysborough. So we heard from more than 500 Nova Scotians as we traveled the province, and they were pleased to hear that we had a very diverse portfolio, part of which is the Maritime Link. But part of our plan for energy in this province is local energy, it's reliable energy, it's tax-free energy, it's green, and it's efficient. And those are part of our reliability on a diverse source of energy in the province. And in Nova Scotia, I think we finally have a government and a leader with experience and a plan, a vision to lead our province forward on energy issues. And I know that some opposition members would prefer that we rely simply on Hydro-Quebec, but we don't believe that's the only option that's out there. And we're on the verge, really, of a very historic opportunity here in the province, with an opportunity with our sister province in Newfoundland and Labrador. And it's been described truly as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Maritime Link is an affordable and secure, made in Nova Scotia, Atlantic Canada energy plan, which will provide us with the lowest fares rates for generations to come. And I believe as a government we're doing everything to ensure that Nova Scotia understands the details of the project. Our government wants to ensure this project offers the best option for our energy future, and so we've asked an independent body, the Utility and Review Board, to undertake a thorough public review of the Maritime Link proposal. And the 6-month UARB hearing process is an important step that will ensure Nova Scotians receive all the information they require in relation to the Maritime Link Lower Churchill project in a timely fashion. The UARB will make an informed decision. They'll make an impartial decision based on the best evidence they have, based on the expertise that's available to them, whether it's John Dalton of Power Advisory or Emeritus witness testimony, or whether it's any other expert they require to come in to present the evidence to them. Madam Speaker, we introduced the Maritime Link Act regulations, and all parties in this House certainly had the opportunity to debate that. Last spring, the bill was here, and it was supported unanimously. The Liberal caucus supported it, the Conservative caucus supported it, and in fact, some of them want to say it was even their idea to bring it forward. So we were thankful for that support and showed that all parties supported the idea of hydroelectricity from Newfoundland and Labrador. I want to mention the one support that we appreciated hearing from was from the member from Argyll. And the honourable member at that time in May of last year had this to say: I think all parties in this House have spoken to this issue on a number of occasions, and I can say that our party will be supporting this bill because it's something we've talked about for a really long time as well. And so, Madam Speaker, I want to table that as supportive from the Conservative Party, and we thank them for their support. And also, Madam Speaker, the member for Dartmouth East was also supportive of the Maritime Link Act when it was passed in this legislature last May, and he said, quote, I think we'll certainly support this bill. And, quote, my hope would be that the Minister and the Premier would actually be willing to consult with the opposition parties on some of the issues that should be covered in that, or even if they ultimately don't agree with this, at least if the Minister and the Premier would seek out our feedback in terms of what issues should be covered by these regulations. And we would certainly appreciate that opportunity, and we hope the Minister and the Premier will do so. So that was a direct quote from the energy critic for the Liberal Party. So again, Madam Speaker, I'll table that as well. And you know what, Madam Speaker, our government has supported the Maritime Link, not only here in the House, but also there was an opportunity for draft regulations that were put out to the public, and to see what comment we'd get from the general public on the Maritime Link. And that comment period was from July the 16th until August the 3rd of last year. And so we encouraged Nova Scotians to come forward and tell us what they thought of the hearing process in support of the Maritime Link Act. And really it was an open and transparent process, and all interested groups could come forward and tell us what they thought. So we received 9 comments from that regulatory hearing time in midsummer last year. And there was a number of opportunities for nonprofit groups and individuals to tell us what they considered were important before the regulations were finalized. And the regulations did set out a 6-month timeline for the Maritime Link UARB hearing process, and they were drafted with input certainly from the UARB. And I want to point out, Madam Speaker, that there was something missing. We did not hear in that regulatory review period from either of the opposition parties. We did not hear from the Liberal caucus. We did not hear from the Conservative caucus during that regulatory review period in July and August of last year. So I assume that they were happy with the timelines, with the period that was available to the UARB to review the process on the Maritime Link on the Lower Churchill project. So certainly they had that opportunity. There were 9 submissions received from the general public, not a one from either opposition party. So, Madam Speaker, the opposition parties say there's not enough time here, but they were given lots of time there during the regulatory review last summer, and to have their say on if they felt 180 days or half a year was not sufficient for the UARB to review this process and to make a decision. I don't know, perhaps they were on summer vacation at that time, I'm not sure, but they didn't come forward with any suggestions on the regulatory rules that were laid out. So we believe that half a year time frame, Madam Speaker, is the right length of time, and that decision is not going to change. There's also been the complaint there's been too much information come forward during the review process, and in many ways, Madam Speaker, that's misleading, because a lot of that information that was out there is public documents, public information. It's been available for months now to look at. As an example, the Atlantic Energy Gateway studies is part of that material that was laid out there, and that's been available on the Department of Energy's website for months now to look at. And certainly we support the Atlantic Energy Gateway initiative, and working in cooperation with our neighbours in Newfoundland and Labrador and New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island. So there's a lot of it is not new material, and we feel what the opposition are saying here really is a red herring, that a lot of that material is already available to people long before the hearing came along. So I know my time is limited, Madam Speaker, but We believe that the half-a-year period is sufficient time to review the material that's available, to cross-examine and to get the information that's required. And really, they have up until the 27th of May before the public hearing process starts. So again, I guess in closing, Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity here to talk about the Maritime Link, which is going to provide us the lowest cost option for Nova Scotians and the lowest and fairest rates for the people of this province. And I'm looking forward to the day when power is switched on from the Lower Churchill project. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Hey, stand up.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to have an opportunity this afternoon to take part in the debate on what we've certainly believed all along has been a very important topic in this House, and will be probably for months ahead and probably for years ahead, the way that it looks right now. It was interesting to hear the minister's comments there a few minutes ago when he began, and I can quote him to some degree, and I'll get the key point of it here. When he started his comments a few minutes ago, he talked about Nova Scotians having the fairest rates and the lowest fairest rates for Nova Scotian. The debate really is, a lot of this debate and the ongoing debate has been exactly that point, Madam Speaker. We've not yet heard what the rates will be. And you know, there's a lot of things we do know, though, so I'm going to touch on a few of the things we do know. And I'll come back to what we know about the rates, or what we don't know, I guess I should say, Madam Speaker, about the rates. What we do know is that people are still struggling today, and have been struggling for some time, to pay their high cost of power. We hear from them on a regular basis. I'm sure in your constituency you probably hear from the odd one as well, if not lots of them. I know where I come from, we hear from quite a few of them. And you can almost pinpoint the day in the week when you're going to hear from them. And that's the week they're reminded, when that bill comes. And they go, wow, yet another increase. And in January, when we saw the increase and the bills came into the new year, people were upset. And we heard from a lot of people. And they're saying, how is it possible that this is fair to Nova Scotians, to us as ratepayers? You know, the minister also spoke a few minutes ago about his energy tour. He's traveling around the province and he's getting input. And you know, he's traveled all over the province, and he's saying 500 people. What do we have living in this province? We're just shy of 1 million, 425,000 households. So that says right there, there's at least 425,000 or more ratepayers in this province who are paying a power bill. You have small business, you have big business, and we've heard from them, all categories. There's nobody left out here, you know. What we do know is businesses are closing because they can't afford to stay in this province and pay the power bills. Businesses are laying people off. Now, we know that the economy's been bad. We know that it's tough times in this province. We've just been making it tougher by seeing increases, 30% in the last few years, increase in power bills alone, let alone all of the other things that businesses and individuals, for that matter, and ratepayers and taxpayers and trying to manage a household have to maintain. Cost of food's gone up. Everything has gone up. We know that. Everything has gone up. They are saying we cannot sustain high power rates. We cannot continue to have rate increases. And what we do know is that they just went up another 3% in January, with a guaranteed increase again coming, which will be here before we know it, unfortunately, will be January 2014, with another guaranteed rate increase. We've heard talk about guaranteed rate increases for the next decade. What will that mean? Doesn't attract anybody here. It doesn't attract business, number one. There's no reason for people. I talk to people all the time, young people getting out of school. Another one the other day, a friend of mine. Where is he going? He's going to Alberta to work and travel back because his family's here. I said, are you going to stay in Nova Scotia with your family and travel back and forth? If I can, but I might have to move because I don't know if that's going to work. There's so many scenarios like that. And these are real scenarios. You know, we heard other members talk about the experts and the advocates and so on, but you know who the real experts are, Madam Speaker? The real experts, along with all them people, are them people paying that bill every month or every 2 months. Those are the ratepayers, the taxpayers in the province of Nova Scotia. They are the experts to know whether it's good or bad for them. We can all stand in this House and speak as we wish about time, not being enough time. You know what? Time is of the essence. Yes, to some degree, here it is. We could debate time until time is no more. We'll not agree. We already know that. That's just the way this place works, unfortunately. And the taxpayers, the ratepayers, same people, they're tired of that. They're tired of those games. They want to see government step up to the plate and do what is right. So when they talk about this energy link to Newfoundland, they look at it and go, well, we don't really know what to think. There's been a lot of debate. You go to the coffee shops, you talk to people in your office, talk to your family, Talk to everyday people on the street. They will make very good points. Some will support it. Some will say, what's the right answer? Some will say, what's it going to cost? Most importantly, people need to know what it's really going to cost. That's really the big piece here. And so far, and we've asked many times, the minister knows this, he's no stranger to this question, what will the cost be? Now, maybe he and the Premier and somebody else know the cost over the course of 35 years or more, what this means. I mean, you can't take lightly 35 years. Think about that. How much changes in the world in 35 years? A lot changes in 35 years. A lot can change. Technology, the development of other kinds of energy sources out there. We've been talking tidal out there in my backyard, Minas Basin. We've all heard this story. We're waiting for better technology to help create that. We know that that could be powerful. 35 years is a long time to lock us in to something that we don't know the cost of. And we've heard stories about loading it on the front end and having better rates and paying more on the back end, or vice versa, or it's wide open, you know, really. It sounds like the power companies get a variety of options, and maybe that's part of the deal with government and how they plan to make that all work, Madam Speaker. I'm not really sure. I'm not sure if anybody's sure. I'm not sure if they're sure. But for 35 years to lock us in, we know that people are going to be upset about that. They're already upset about the very thought of it. They looked at Newfoundland, and there's a lot of Newfoundlanders living in the province of Nova Scotia. A lot of folks have come from there. A lot of them remember the deal over there. It's an emotional piece in Newfoundland of what's happened between them and Quebec. We all know that. They look at that and go, yeah, you know what, this could be good for Newfoundland. We've heard that brought up as well. Maybe it is. Maybe it is good for Nova Scotia. But you know, when you're signing a deal and you don't know what it means on the dotted line, what you're paying for, what you're buying, they look at the link itself. They're going to pay for all these years, and then they're going to say, oh, we don't own that. That's like taking out a mortgage on a home, paying for 25, 30, 35 years, never living in the house, by the way, letting somebody else live in it and not pay you anything is a good example of that, and then saying, oh, you can have it. It doesn't really matter to us. My investment has been of no value whatsoever. The benefit to that person, the ratepayer, the taxpayer, is there's no answer at that point. We've not yet heard what the real costs are. I think if the real costs came out, if we knew, and we were doing some comparable analysis as to what wind might be, or what potential tidal might be, or other opportunities to bring in gas perhaps might be. We still hear about coal, and more recently that, you know, we want to get off coal. Well, yeah, at some point probably we're talking about that. But the reality is, we know, we've heard other experts say that coal is going to be around for quite a few years. We talk about economic development, creating jobs in this province. Have we ever thought about, you know, our own coal? It's there, yeah, it might cost a little more to get out, but you know, we're putting people to work. Or we could just give away a few $100 million, you know, for what? Well, we do need to figure out the job piece, and the minister did say a few minutes ago, I did hear him quite clearly, I think I wrote it down, thousands of jobs would be created. Where? Good question. Ed, good question. Where? Where will the jobs be created? In Newfoundland? Yeah, good point, maybe. I guess there would be some jobs creating that link. It would have to be built, it would have to be put in the water. It would have to be, you know, there's some stuff I guess it would have to be done on the Cape Breton end. There would be some, I suppose, some infrastructure would have to be upgraded along the lines. What are we doing? You know, we're spending a lot of money. And here's one fact that we do know. This project started out at one price, and before it's even off the ground and one nail is driven in anything, or one shovel's in the ground, $2 billion has already been added. How do we think we're going to manage this? I wonder how Newfoundland thinks they're going to manage this debt. And when I talk to people from Newfoundland who have moved here, and people that still live there, they're saying, well, it's all going to go in the provincial debt. Where else are you going to get 10, 11, 12, $15 billion? It's got to go in the provincial debt. But they see it as an investment to some degree, I suppose, and will be well debated, and we'll see what the end result will be, whether they support that totally or they don't. I think as governments change, ideas change, there's any number of options that could change, and that's one of the other fears I think we as Nova Scotians have to take into consideration when we look at this deal. Here we are. We know we're going into an election sometime soon. I think that's probably fair to say. And I'll even be realistic, Mr. Speaker, and I'll say within the next year, Mr. Speaker, that we're probably going to be into an election. Well, that's fine. That's fine. Perhaps government's in a rush because they want to make sure everything is all said and done in their mandate, and they get this deal off the ground or into the water or whatever the right terminology might be here in this one. But let's not rush it. Let's take the time. And the minister spoke, well, it's been a fair bit of time, and we've got until May, and there's been this opportunity and that opportunity. We've made clear our position, you know, Mr. Speaker, on this whole ordeal, that we should be seeking out everything that's good. But what we are forgetting are those experts that I talked about a few minutes ago. Those experts, Mr. Speaker, are Nova Scotia ratepayers. Those are the real experts. We have all kinds of great people behind the scenes that are referenced as experts who will put forward their letters and their support, and they'll ask the consumer advocate people that are there in a variety of groups, all good people, all doing the right thing, and they're there for the, intervening for the right reasons too. Wouldn't it be amazing to see 200 or 300 or 400 or 1,000 Nova Scotians come forward and tell their stories, because their stories are real stories. Those stories are people putting food on the table. These aren't words that are just said, or am I going to pay my power bill and have it cut off? I know one woman who had her power bill cut off because she couldn't afford to pay for it, and the unfortunate part is it got a heavy rain and her sump pump couldn't kick in and her house flooded. I mean, it just keeps going on and on and on. So that's just one story, one simple story from thousands, hundreds of thousands of ratepayers. You know, we need to figure out the fairest, the minister's quote, the lowest fairest rates for Nova Scotians. We're okay with that. We do agree with the lowest fairest rates, and we've even put forward some ideas in this House, Mr. Speaker. We put forward legislation. We're the only party, by the way, that have stood up in this place and anywhere else and publicly have said, we'll freeze the power rates, because we've done the math, we know how to do the math, and we know we can do that, while we assess and reassess and take a better look and get energy from the sources that can provide it at the best rates for Nova Scotians. We don't care where it comes from. If the deal is the right deal, we're going to reach out to anybody that wants to supply energy in this province and to this province. We believe you have to do that, because that's what ratepayers want. You talk to them, Mr. Speaker. You have them in your constituency. I'm sure that everybody's not thrilled that power rates have gone up since January, and they're not thrilled that they're going to go up again. I'm sure you have to hear from them just like the rest of us do. This is no shock. They want to hear you say, we want to work for you and we want to be able to bring you the best rates. And you talk about confusion, and that's fair. As I said a few minutes ago, people will be confused because they don't know. We're so deep into the detail. You need to keep it high level. And you need to say, look, this is a good deal because. And the because part that's missing is, this is going to be the cost. Mr. Speaker, we need to know it. It's only right that you invest in what is fair and long-term for Nova Scotians. We don't have a problem with that. We agree with the minister on those comments. But there's a piece he's left out. And, you know, again, if the Minister of Energy and the Premier or anyone else in Cabinet or government or on that side, or Nova Scotia Power, or anywhere for that matter, can give the price, then give it. Tell Nova Scotians what it is. Let Nova Scotians have a say. Don't just travel around the province. You know, Mr. Speaker, in all honesty, great thing. Minister's going around and he's holding his round tables. He's got 500 Nova Scotians out. But yet he's not told any of them what the price will be. How can they actually buy in and say, that's a good, low, fair, long-term, secure price for us when he hasn't given it? If it's there to give, or projected even, somewhere's close, can he tell us that we think that this is what it's going to be? But better yet, we need a guarantee, because we're going to spend a lot of money. We are asking ratepayers for a lot of money to invest. And I think that they would. The people in this province are smart. They would invest wisely. They want to invest wisely. They want to invest for the long term. They want to know that that rate exists for them, that it is long term, that it is fair. That's only reasonable, and I think that if you're looking for that buy-in, you could get it. But you have to be transparent. You have to be upfront. You have to tell people what really matters, because it does matter to them. These are the people who are debating, should I stay or should I go? My daughter's going to university next year. I said to her, where are you going to go when you're done? Don't know. I want her to think about staying in Nova Scotia and being a teacher. That's what I want her to do. I want her to raise her family here. Why? Because that's good for our province. If there's real jobs to be had, then let's put jobs out there. Let's develop other energy sources that may be acceptable, that may be affordable, may be long-term good investment. Let's put Nova Scotians to work. And if people in this House, right here, Mr. Speaker, the People's House, don't think that jobs in the economy are important to people in this province, let me tell you, it's number one. People are worrying about their job. They're worrying about long-term sustainability. Thank you, Keith. Mr. Speaker, they are very concerned about what the words long-term mean. They want to stay here. They want to raise their families here. They can't do it, and they won't do it, and more of them, especially the young people, are standing up and saying, we're getting out of here. We can't do it because we don't know. We want jobs. They're not here. We want good, you want me to stay in the province of Nova Scotia? Certain things have to be guaranteed. Good housing markets, good prices for this, good prices for that, and certainly when it comes to the end of the month and paying their bills, they need to be able to pay those bills, Mr. Speaker. And the energy bill, we know, is going in the wrong direction. We need to do more for the real experts in the province of Nova Scotia, and that is the Nova Scotia ratepayers. With that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much for the opportunity this afternoon.
Thank you. I will now recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and pleased today to join the emergency late debate. This is a very important topic to Nova Scotians. Constituents that I talk with and come to my office are taking notice, and they definitely know that there is a great deal to analyze and dissect around this issue. In terms of the debate, it is in fact around the fact that the UARB has simply too short a timeline of 180 days to allow for submissions and the hearing process to take place. Now, I know the Minister of Energy makes light of this, and there were other opportunities and so forth to present submissions. But the real intervening, the real look by the UARB is, in fact, that 6-month period. And this is very much a moving project that keeps getting additional information added on as we move to the point where the project gets underway and moves towards an anticipated completion date of 2017. And at the present time, there are literally thousands of pages of documents that are coming forward, that the interveners are gathering, that a wide range of expertise is presenting. You know, let's look, with all due respect to the abilities of Mr. Dalton. Mr. Dalton was given an agenda by government to make sure that the maritime link and its outcome and the analysis was going to favor the maritime link over any other project. In fact, I would like to see all of the monies that Nova Scotia Power and Emera are putting into the maritime link, I would like to see them develop true local energy. Okay, now, yes, we're part of a region, and Newfoundland and Nova Scotia and PEI and New Brunswick should certainly work together, and greater regionalization can help us all. But I like to take a look, and I've mentioned, I think, at least on one occasion, how Germany has become the transformative nation with producing energy. And in the year 2000, they had just a handful of companies producing power. But they made a policy in the year 2000 that said any German can produce power. Can you imagine allowing the innovators, the risk takers in Nova Scotia, with that kind of a mandate? Any of you can produce power. Germany went from a handful of producers to 800. And of course, the big producers said, you know, we're walking on a path of insanity here for the big industrial nation of Germany. Well, from the year 2000, when they produced 3 or 4% renewable energy, they've quickly gone to over 25%, and by 2050, they'll be at 80% with their nuclear power plants and thermal plants shut down. I would love to see that kind of opportunity given to Nova Scotians, and this would have been a real debate to see how Nova Scotians could respond. But of course, we have Emera controlling and wanting to control power at least for the next 35 years beyond 2017 by in fact giving us the Nova Scotia ratepayer investing in the project. It's very interesting that the past estimates put the link at $1.2 billion, but now we know it's going to cost at least 1.5. Well, in fact, during the period of intervening, the 180 days, we're going to find out that a deeper analysis, in fact, is going to move this project anywhere between $3 and $5 billion. And my colleague from Hans West was talking about the expertise and the ratepayers, because that's who's going to pay the $3 to $5 billion for this project. The financial model, and it puts you and I, it puts us picking up all that cost, all that risk. In addition, failure of the project to repay the financial responsibilities defers the responsibility on the backs of the Nova Scotia ratepayers, the province, and the federal taxpayers through the federal loan guarantee term sheet. By fencing the project, the financial liabilities of Emera, NSPI, and NSPML are minimal, if any. None of us are financial experts, but this causes me much concern. The estimates in the application to date are very thin and sketchy, and this is why the 180 days need to be expanded to at least 1 year so that this full analysis can be done. Emera, at the time of filing, did not have any firm numbers on the turnkey contracts for those parts of the project concerning the submarine cable itself, the cable's marine installation, environmental analysis, or route surveying of the 2,000-meter wide swath of seafloor, the coastal grounding sites, major conversion stations, switchyard designs, etc. Now, those are going to come out in the hearings, and it's going to be very revealing. There are individuals and companies who have looked at this project for over 25 years. This project is not a year 2000 think process, or just in the last 4 or 5 years. It's been looked at for many years. And now, as we approach a start date, potentially a start date, well, I guess it's going to be a start date, because the UARB in many ways has lost some of its true power in making a decision on this project. One of the very, the reality here, Mr. Speaker, is that when the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Liberal Party, went and met with Danny Williams, it was indeed about securing a potential deal with Nova Scotia. But the deal was very much in line of buying power from Newfoundland, because we do have to move off the fossil fuel appetite and move towards a greater amount of renewables. So when our leader went there, he was talking about what would be the best deal for Nova Scotians. What we have seen over the past 4 years is our Premier working on the best deal for Emera, the best deal for Nova Scotia Power. This is not in any way the best deal for ratepayers. Something happened to our Premier when he flew the Emera jet to Newfoundland, because he truly forgot about the average Nova Scotian and what we're paying now for our power bills. In fact, this reference here to the percent change from 2010 to 2013, this is the NDP legacy to Nova Scotians. The highest power rates at 30.3%, outstripping every other province in Canada, and I will table that, Mr. Speaker. And we know that this is going to continue on. Because one of the interesting way for Nova Scotia Power to increase the envelope of its monopoly under the ratepayer 9% cushion on market rates for the next 35 years. Approval of this project, if found consistent under the terms of reference of the UARB, will tie up any further opportunities for other private sector imports to assist to bring down rates in a Nova Scotia open market for many years. We all know that where monopolies and when monopolies exist, the only way to get the better price, to get the better deal, is indeed to provide competition. So in effect, this project strengthens Nova Scotia Power's monopoly in this province. The UARB also approved the RES and the RFQ approval system for new IPPs to be administered by Nova Scotia Power. This is not any semblance of the original open market design envisioned by Nova Scotia by any of the original acts or regulations. So in many ways, Nova Scotia Power wants to have no direct competitors in Nova Scotia wholesale electricity market for the next 35 years, and we know that the NDP, in fact, is enabling Nova Scotia Power and Emera to do just that. So when I talk about Muskrat Falls to constituents, and they want to know, what my view is. And I said, I go back, and I was a high school student in Newfoundland, and I heard Joey Smallwood speak about what was going to transform Newfoundland, and that was, of course, the Upper Churchill Falls development, the creation of Lobstick Lake, which would in fact produce about 5 million kilowatts of electricity, and this would be part of Newfoundland's future economy. But what we must realize is that during a time of literally no inflation, Newfoundland made a long-term 69-year deal at the same rate. We may say, Quebec should have reopened the deal. Well, Quebec and Newfoundland are working out the deal that was made by Smallwood during a time when inflation was pretty well non-existent. And so going by today's figures and numbers and analysis, no, it isn't a great deal, but it's the deal that Joey Smallwood saw as part of transforming the economy of Newfoundland at that time. Now, it's interesting that Manitoba Hydro International, as they've started to provide some updating on cost analysis, in fact, have now moved the price tag from $5 billion to $7.7 billion for the entire project. And this is a 24% increase in capital cost in just 2 years. And Manitoba Hydro International went on to say, and this is the part that I feel we need to take a look at, they said it was the best deal for Newfoundland, and they would not go so far as to say it was even a good deal for Nova Scotia. And they projected that benefit to Newfoundland from now until the year 2067. Well, we're not even going to get to the year 2067, because after the 35 years, when we get electricity, building the Maritime Link, we're going to be so generous that we're going to give the Maritime Link back to Newfoundland. Because you can be assured that when 2041 does come, Newfoundland and Hydro-Quebec will work out shorter term, more sensible inflationary factors calculated in the next deal. And they will continue to move power through Quebec. And I feel that Newfoundland is going to need the power that will come through the Maritime Link, or a good portion of it. And we are prepared to